One. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Inside Movies Galore. I'm your host, David Strege, and tonight I am actually hosting. So, tonight we're going to go on about a film that was filmed in 2006. Sorry about the noise, folks. And it was directed by a very interesting director by the name of Guillermo del Toro, who is a Spanish director, I believe, correct? And so the name of the film is called Pan's Labyrinth, and it is all in subtitles. And I'm just going to read off a synopsis here. So in the Falangist Spain of 1944, the bookish young stepdaughter of a sadistic army officer escapes into an eerie but captivating fantasy world. So, Jacob, when was your first? Was this a first-time watch for you, or was this a new watch for you?
Well, this was definitely not my first viewing of this film. I believe this was actually the film that introduced me to Guillermo del Toro. I'm not absolutely certain that I saw it first, but I'm about 99% certain. And of course, the film was very much a heavily talked about, heavily the critics were raving about it when it came out, and I was really, really into reading critic reviews and everything in the early aughts. And I made a point one night to get out and do some serious Oscar viewing. And I actually went and hit three movies in one night. I went to the local art house theater and watched The Queen and followed it up with Pan's Labyrinth. And then on the way home, I went to another theater and watched Dreamgirls. So that was actually a pretty impressive movie night. I have seen Pan's Labyrinth at least one time in the interim when I added it to my collection. And in the run up to this, I watched the Criterion release, Trilogia de Guillermo del Toro, which has Kronos and El Espinazo del Diablo, The Devil's Backbone. And I watched each film, I've watched every bit of on disc extras. So if you count the commentary tracks, I watched each film two additional times, three for Devil's Backbone. So yeah, I've definitely seen this one a little bit, and I instantly fell in love with it. It's still my favorite Del Toro film, and just a really good one.
Okay. La 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 la. Okay, over to Brandon. What was this a first time watch for you, or was this a rewatch for you? And what were your first impressions of it this time around?
It's definitely not my first time watching this. Matter of fact, I want to say I saw it in the theater because it was the first film I ever saw in subtitles on the big screen. I just don't remember where I saw it in the theaters. I know I've seen it at least twice since then because I had gotten one copy of the movie, and then I got the Criterion one for this particular podcast, and I decided I was going to go ahead and start with that. So this will be my third time viewing it, I believe.
Okay.
And first impression was very different from what I had thought it was going to be because it looked like almost an Alice in Wonderland basic fantasy, but it was much darker and more serious than I had thought it was. So when I saw it this time, I knew what to expect. And I think I liked it much more this time around than I did the first time around. So it's still a wonderful fantasy horror film, and that's my first thoughts.
I, on the other hand, did not see this in the theater. theater. This was my second time at least viewing it. Because the first time, believe my fiance told me about it. It was one of the ones that she had seen the trailers for, and eventually one of us picked it up, and then later I picked it up because I liked it. But I have not seen it since. So for this viewing, I watched it again, and I liked it a lot better than I did the first time because I have a love-hate relationship with subtitled films, and it's like I've grown used to reading films a lot, especially since I used to have a mentor that was given to me by the state who would purposely take me to subtitled films, and through his eyes, I was able to see a lot of films like The King of Masks and films of that nature, and that's how I kind of got into a Kurosawa. And later on, I saw this film, and it wasn't until I'd seen The Shape of Water that I'd realized one of the creatures was actually, in fact, the creature who played the creature. So, I overall, I definitely thought it was a definitely darker feel. So having that fairy tale like quality, it's definitely different. So now that we've gone through our first impressions, just so you know, folks, a spoiler warning, so that all of you out there will know that we'll probably be going through some items, items or characters or whatever you want to call it. We'll probably be talking about more than you would probably think you would talk about in a general discussion. So, moving on to the plot. So the plot is basically this little girl who has an imagination and loves to read, and she ends up in a situation that was not of her own making. So what do we think of the little girl, first of all?
It's a fascinating character, and I always thought Ivana Baquero did a phenomenal job. I think it's one of the best child acting performances I've seen. The But she basically is, like you said, she has a really powerful imagination, and she has a mother who's completely dismissive of that and goes to live with a stepfather who's beyond dismissive of imagination. He is all about order and control. Yeah.
No, what about you?
Yeah, I agree. It's an amazing. To me, I think that she is a great central character for the basis of the film, and it is because of that imagination and her love of fairy tales and such that I feel like they could have made the twists and turns of this movie possible.
Okay, well, let's look at the background of the story. So, apparently, there's a fairy tale in the background where there's this daughter of the underworld that has either been lost in time or her soul has passed on, and there is a prophecy that she shall return. And so, when she saves this rock on the statue, it's like that was the initial point of where apparently the creatures of the forest believed that she was in fact the heir to the throne. So what do we think about that fairy tale backline where she's this royalty to this underworld?
Well, it's very cool. But the one of the themes that runs throughout the movie, and you talk about her finding the stone. There's a theme that runs throughout the movie, and it's in the narrative, and I've definitely heard it in the discussions with Del Toro. is that this is a world that is available to those who know where to look, who know what to look for. And she saw the stone in the middle of the road and recognized it as something different and went looking and found the statue. And then when she saw the insect come out, she recognized it as a fairy. She didn't see an insect, she saw a fairy. And whereas to any adult pretty much in the movie, they just don't see these things.
Okay. What about you, Brandon?
I mean, I agree with that. I feel like the fairy tale setting really is a great setup. First off, it sets up an excellent fantasy piece, but also I agree that having the mind of the child involved in this, again, fits well to that and just the whole characterization of the tale.
Okay. Well, because it has a fairy tale background, it also has something to do with reality and what is happening. Again, we have these two military factions that are apparently fighting against each other, and one of them is like a resistance kind, and the other is kind of like a army base type encampment where the one is there and they're providing food for the villagers or whatever, wherever they are, and the general in charge is in fact the stepfather that you aforementioned, Jacob. What do we think of his character?
He's a nasty piece of work.
That's putting it bluntly, almost.
Right. Well, Del Toro definitely talks in the interviews about because he was making the film a fairy tale, he kind of stripped the characters down to their essentials. They're pretty much archetypes, but they're really well thought out, like well developed archetypes. And there's also the thing of this film is it's actually a companion film to Devil's Backbone. And I wonder if we shouldn't have done that first, but whatever. But both of them, the main antagonist is pretty much a stand in for Franco's fascist regime in Spain. And this guy definitely is a stand in for Franco and his cohorts. And yeah, the film definitely comes out as a broadside against fascism.
Well, I'm sure we can definitely talk about the connection to the Devil's Backbone a little bit in detail later on. At least that which maybe Jacob. But Brandon, what do you think of the character of the stepfather?
Well, I've discussed this with I think with Jacob earlier on that I considered him almost cartoonishly evil at points. He does have a backstory. He does have a drive and a personality, but it's definitely overshadowed by how nasty he is. I mean, he literally is that evil step parent from the fairy tales, which I mean is pretty much what he's meant to be.
Well, yes,
Right.
And I mean, just showing. I mean, just at that first scene where they're confronting the hunters who are hunting for rabbits and just shoots them, and then they bring up the rabbits and say, "Well, don't get me unless you've thoroughly investigated it next time."
Well, he shoots them after smashing the other one's face in with a bottle.
Yeah. So, like I said, I feel like it's just he was almost cartoonishly evil in that method.
okay.
I mean, still, I mean, he still has some depth, but definitely, definitely not hard to tell he was the bad guy here.
Well, yeah. According to his backstory, he knew the time and the moment of his father's death, which was why he kept that a pocket watch on him the entire time. So it's like everything had to be on time for him. If anything wasn't to his perfect little world, if it was an anomaly, he would smite it. He would, tap it out. You know what I mean? So,
Actually, I think his first line, wasn't it? Was his first line? He's looking at the watch and he says 15 minutes late. That's like, I think that's the first thing he says in the movie.
Yes.
oh yes. So he's definitely on that time consuming, looking at the clock and making sure that everyone gets to where they need to be in a timely fashion. Orderly. So, moving on to the character of Mercedes. What do we think of her?
She is a very fun character too. She's the kind of the one adult who takes the child seriously, but she also is sort of like you could say sort of like the snake in the grass, if you will, for the commander, because she is with the rebels, but she's under she's sort of like a spy for the rebels, so she's not. And I think Del Toro kind of said she was sort of like an adult version of Ophelia in a lot of ways, but still different in a lot of other ways.
Okay. What about you, Brandon?
I think that really does cover it. I mean, she was that individual that was placed in there. I mean, she was the perfect spy for later in the movie when we get to that area. That individual who has not only the hidden, is hidden throughout the most of it, showing kindness, but also an amazing strength. That there are a lot of women in Del Toro tales that show that level of strength, and she's definitely not the least of those.
I like the fact that she was the person who introduced the lullaby, which ultimately was the score in the movie.
Right.
A little bit later, if we like, but I like that aspect of her, and I'm trying to think whether maybe the fact that she had a knife was a similarity in the way that the child, the young girl, Ophelia, had been tasked to find a knife, evidently within because. Well, let's look at that further storyline. So, because they believe that she is, in fact, the heir to this underworld, they have to figure out whether she has become human, or whether she is still of the underworld. So she's tasked to do three tasks in order to get herself to that place where they could open the portal for her to return to her world. What do we think about that aspect of the film?
Well, like you said, that's the central conceit. And actually, we didn't really talk about the character of the fawn, the one that puts the task to her, but basically, it's to test her mettle. It's to test her character, really. Technically, she gets two of the three answers wrong, but she gets them right because of the way she does it. One of a big part of the film is choice, and she is for each of the tasks is her making a choice, basically.
Okay. What about you, Brandon? Brandon?
Sorry, microphone. But a lot of it, again, as Jacob had said, it is to test her mettle. It's really to test her as a human, well, as just a being. And of course, there is that thought whether these tasks are her testing herself. as opposed to an outsider testing it, whether all of this is really her coming up with these tasks or whether it is the outside being doing that.
Okay, well, let's go back and talk about the characters of Bond. What do we think of the way he looks, the way he sounds, the way he acts? What did you think about him, Jacob?
Well, first of all, it's important, and I don't know if we said in the introduction that the film is actually El Laberinto del Fauno. Pan's Labyrinth is the American title, and Del Toro specifically did not name him Pan. He said that to him, Pan was almost more of a sexualized character. He was definitely not a character you would see mixing with innocent children. So to him, the fawn is just the fawn. But the fawn is meant to be a character that could be good or bad. There's a lot of he could go either way, and when he's testing Ophelia, you're meant to question whether what his motives are as he goes along. Definitely, as far as how they put them together with Doug Jones and all the makeup and everything they did, that was an impressive creation.
Well, Doug Jones was actually the character that played in the second task. I'm not sure if was he in fact the Fawn.
He was the Fawn and the Pale Man, and they did do that intentionally.
Okay, that's what I thought. And I like the contrast between the two. It's like they're two different people. On the one hand, you've got the leader, the guy who's supposed to be the guide. He's the one who is supposed to guide her to the underworld. The second one was supposed to be there in place in case she made the wrong choice. You know what I mean? And there were consequences that happened when she made the wrong choice twice, in fact. What do we think about the mistakes that she made?
I thought the second time, I mean, that mistake at the table, I remember watching this. I watched this with my wife the next time too, and she was just like, why are you so stupid? Over and over again. As we just sat there and I was like, can you not hear him coming up on you? It's just, sometimes I feel that in movies they work hard to try and play up the incompetent child card. And in horror, they're really bad about it. With a child that probably should know better in many aspects.
And yet, and yet, me, they're just that young enough that even though it's expected of children to know better, they do stray from their path that they are led by. I mean, anyone who has a child knows that you can teach them all that you desire them to know, but if they want to do something bad, they'll do it.
Oh yeah, true. But then when they know that their life is potentially threatened in a place where something is obviously not right. I mean, I know as a child I was not the best behaved child in the world, but if I was in a room with a monster and I was told that I probably wouldn't make it out alive if I touched the food that the monster had, not eating dinner or not, I would not be touching the food because there's a monster right there.
I know it would have been great for me.
I'll admit, I kind of wondered that at first myself, and I do still think it feels kind of like that's kind of a very bad choice that she made. But it comes right on the heels of her making another choice that's apparently wrong, but it's apparently right because she finds the knife she's looking for. So on one hand, she may have thought, okay, well, I chose for myself and it turned out right. So maybe I can choose for myself again this time around. And in the interview, Del Toro said that this was her learning that her actions have consequences. And he also points out that she hadn't eaten in almost 2 days, and you kind of lose track of that in the movie. But she was probably very, 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 very hungry. You see that much food, you're going to want to eat.
Very true.
Yeah. Also, it sets up the whole chase, and actually one thing I thought was pretty cool um, was that he said in the interview that he actually watched the movie with Stephen King, and that scene made Stephen King squirm with discomfort, and that to him that was better than any Oscar he could ever win.
I would imagine so. But going back to, was there any character that we have not mentioned as of yet that we may want to talk about? Do we want to talk about maybe the Doctor character?
Oh, the Doctor was great.
I mean,
See, I always confuse him with the one in Devil's Backbone. The problem is I watch them back to back.
yeah, I did not know that the Devil's Backbone was actually a companion piece to this film, and that's like one of the Guillermo del Toro films that I own, but I have not yet watched yet.
Well, this one in Kronos, theoretically.
Well, there again, there definitely is a tenuous connection with Kronos and a strong connection with Devil's Backbone. And I guess we could probably go a little bit more into that, like in the later part, like where we talk about the overall whatever. As far as the Doctor in Devil's Backbone does show up in this film very briefly, but this Doctor, of course, is a whole different character, much younger actor too. Although he's passed away apparently, Alex Angulo. But this was another one where choice was very important, and one of my favorite parts. Well, I guess we'll jump ahead a little bit. Favorite scenes. I love the part where the Doctor makes a choice, knowing that he has just signed his own death warrant, and he does it anyway. And that whole scene was great.
well, yeah, I would have to agree because there are some people who are not designed to be, those who follow orders, and that's exactly what that doctor made a point to point out, and that was exactly the anomaly that the Capitan was looking for in order to kill him. So, what do we think about the lieutenant of the captain? I mean, it looked like he was regretting some of the things that he was doing.
I think so. I think you saw flashes of conscience. I mean, they weren't really, again, none of the characters really were too ambiguous because none of them were super, super fleshed out. But you definitely saw some idea that the captain was the harshest of the bunch.
Moving on to locations, somewhat, because I believe that this film is somewhat of a location, where we have this labyrinth that is at the end of this mill. What do we think of in the inner circles of the labyrinth itself? Does it kind of remind us of Orpheus and the Maze?
I hadn't thought of this, but it makes sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely. I think the sets they constructed for this, like the base of the labyrinth and the fantasy world, well, the underground world, they definitely did show. One of the cool things about all Del Toro's films is a wonderful visual flair, visual sense. Like just they're beautiful films because of the all the influences and everything, but they're just unique.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Which boils all down to the special effects. How did we feel that how they did with the special effects on this film?
They definitely hold up. I mean, this is not a young film. It's not 100%. It's not like super old, but still, For its age, they hold up very well. What CG and practical effects are used, they mix very seamlessly in a lot of the cases.
Well, I even think that there was a little bit of animation involved, specifically in the fairies. Those, even though I know some of the effects were CGI'd, I believe that some of it was actually um, almost like claymation in a sense. You know what I'm saying?
Well, the fairies were almost fully CG, from what I understand. I think they used sort of like saw footage of Del Toro walking around with a long stick that had like a green, vaguely humanoid thing at the tip that sort of was like it's almost like a portable green screen, and they used that for a lot of the bases for the fairies. They did use a blend of effects. For example, with the fawn and the pale man, with both of them, Doug Jones wore 5 hours worth of makeup and prosthetics, but they used CG for touch up here and there, particularly the eyes. And they had green screen on parts of his legs so that they could digitally erase pieces of him to make the creatures look more fantastical. Just as a couple examples. But like Brandon said, they've aged really well.
I agree. I mean, I really couldn't see a whole heck of a lot of, shall I say, imperfections, because the film really it looks really well. I mean, it also plays really well back in my mind, and I can see why we chose it for a monster film, because not only do we have a monster in the Pale Man, but I also believe that we have a monster in the El Capitan character as well, because he emits a lot of evilness, especially with what happens to the little girl in the end.
Right, and that was definitely one of the reasons why this was one that I had nominated, and I specifically had that in mind because you had the Pale Man, and Fawn is technically a monster, not really in an evil sense, but like he looks monstrous. He looks, and then you had the idea of, well, this guy is a monster. He looks human.
Yeah, very much a monster in that film. Probably more monstrous than any of the ones that they had that look like monsters.
What do we think of that look into what the underworld looks like after we see the fading light from little Ophelia?
Well, it's impressive.
It is impressive.
It was definitely impressive. It was an interesting look into to what she ended up, ultimately being or going to. Um, Now going on to the music and the score. How did it work? Did it work with or against the film?
I think it very much worked with it. As you mentioned before, it worked off of Javier Navarrete wrote the music with help from Del Toro. Basically, the idea was they wanted to come up with a lullaby that would be memorable and unique, and I think they did that. And they gave that to Maribel Verdú's character to hum, and then they built the score from that. So it's like and so you hear the lullaby reflected in the score. And there are times where it comes to the front.
A very haunting piece as well,
I
which fits very well with the narrative. I still say, I mean, this film skirts on the borders of drama, horror, and fantasy, and that piece actually covers all three of them quite well.
Right, I think so.
I think when it came to down to the section where you see the torture devices that the El Capitan comes out with, he's like number one. If I bring out this, we'll start to become friends. If I bring out this, that's when we will create a bond between each other. And it's like you can almost feel what the prisoner is feeling as he's describing how he's going to torture him. You know.
Yeah, and I'm not big for torture, but the way he describes it, the way he gives that explanation, and we get to this one, the third one, he's like, "Then I will believe what you have to say." And
And if we get to this one, then no matter anything that you will say, I will believe. Yeah, I mean, the fact that that kind of a torture isn't far from how we torture people in this day and age. I mean, it's not that far from some of the many action films that you see when someone is captured and they're trying to torture them for information. It's not that far from any other techniques, but the way that he says it, and the dawning of realization that, okay, I'm fucked. But Brandon, what did you think of the way that the El Capitan went about to extract his information?
Well, I feel like that was just, as was said earlier, that's a way to show how evil he is, or how he is just like, what's the word? I don't necessarily consider him necessarily as much evil in that as just a machine almost. But no better way to show how much of a monster a person is than to show something like that, like torture, things that we are very uncomfortable with. When you show somebody that is very comfortable with doing things that we are largely uncomfortable with, that tells us this person is not a good person.
Most definitely.
definitely.
Is there anything else that any of you feel like we have not touched on this film as of yet?
Actually, one of the things that drew me to the film more than anything else at the end of the day was the fact that this film played with your own senses, as you would have to keep guessing over and over again, is this really going on? Or is this all in her head? And there are many times that you look at the film and you say, well, wait, if this is all in her head, how come this happened? Like with the maze, how she gets to the center of the maze. How did she get there so quickly if he was right behind her, if this was just all in her head?
Well, again, I think that kind of goes back to what Jacob said about how, remember when she was trying to complete the second task, she supposedly had not eaten in 2 days. What makes you think that she ate anything since?
Oh, again, it's not whether she was. I do feel like there was a part of it there. It's just you still have that point where you think to yourself, it's sort of like the movie K-Pax. For all the things going on with Kevin Spacey, it kind of left you guessing as, well, maybe he was an alien. And in this movie, it leaves you guessing a little bit as to maybe there is some truth to this, or maybe there is. Like, how was she able to get out of her room to get to the baby if the room was locked? And you see the chalk outline.
And that's a
It's just
very good instance because the captain actually sees the chalk. He picks it up and examines it, and and this was something that was given to her by the fawn. So
yes,
it is sort of, in a way, he also sees the mandrake root. He doesn't see it moving, but he sees the root and he has to pry it off this plate, which it had grown onto. So those were evidences where even he was seeing evidence of the magic world. But the fact that he was blind to magic overall, you could see at the end scene when he confronts her and she's right next to the fawn and he doesn't see the fawn. So, so again, that has to do with, can you look and see what you're looking at?
I agree. I
uh,
mean, uh, the fact that this El Capitan can see just a tiny bit. Although his mind is more calculated, it's more cold, so he's not really seeing the magic. But you definitely have a good point there, Jacob. What do you think, Brandon?
well, that's the idea is that because there seems to be some evidence of the fantastic in the real world, it leaves you to doubting. Whereas most of the movie feels like it's indicating that this is all in her head, but it also kind of makes the ending something something that could be completely different in a lot of ways than looks on the surface. So though it's a sad ending, it can still be a bittersweet ending.
Well, yeah, this is very much a movie where the ending depends on what you bring to the table yourself. What you think happened depends on what your own mindset would be. I tend to be very hopeful, more of a kind, I guess, sort of a romantic type. I like happy endings. I look at it as, well, obviously she was reborn in the new world, but you can easily see how a cynic would look at it and go, "Oh man, she just died for nothing," and it's all up to how you read it.
Well, I like to think that this film had several messages. On the one hand, you've got the doctor that cannot cannot be the kind of person the El Capitan wants him to be. You've got the the fighting that's going on where it's obvious in the background that the other side is winning. And um, on the other hand, you got this little girl, Ophelia. Evidently, she doesn't know who her father is. She only suspects because of what this creature, the fawn, is starting to tell her. And I believe that her imagination runs wild with her. So while these bad things are happening, while her mother wants her to call this El Capitan her father, she's seeing the evil that is within him, and so she escapes into this world. And you almost feel like every time she steps into the world, it's like she's sidestepping some of the evil in a sense. You know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, person can only deal with so much bad in their life. So I feel like, in a sense, that her imaginary world was almost like her crutch, her Lionel's blanket, so to speak, throughout the film. But she had all these steps to go through, and I think it was teaching her um, how to become the person she needed to be to get to that other world. But is there anything else that we haven't covered, do you think?
Well, one thing that's very important in any Del Toro film is that we haven't really talked about. We've kind of touched on some of the visual, effects and stuff, But one thing that's very important in his films is the camera work, the cinematography. He has worked with most of his films. He has worked with the same cinematographer, Guillermo Navarro, and he talks in the bonus features I watched for Kronos. He talked about with Kronos discovering what he thought was his best color palette, where he basically uses ambers and blues for the most part, and he only uses red when it's very important to show red. And in this movie, he made a very conscious decision to show blue and cool colors for the real world, and ambers and warm colors for the fantasy world. And as the movie goes on, they start blending together until by the end, you've got plenty of warm colors in the real world. So I just thought that the visually it was really important. It won the Oscar for the cinematography. I think fully deserved.
I think so too.
And Del Toro, I mean, we touched a little bit on his other pieces, but Del Toro is such a varied individual with what he's done. Actually, even when I look back to it, I think about Peter Jackson and some of the range that he has had. But Del Toro has had quite a range, whether it be his work on this or with Hellboy or Mimic, which of course is his favorite film of all time. Being facetious, of course, or even his work in crafting the extremely horrific and creepy tale and video game format for PT. It is like I say, he is a quite an interesting artist. One that you sometimes don't know exactly what to expect every time.
I think there's some things you can expect. He is very, very, very enthralled, really, with the gothic, with the grotesque and the unusual. He loves unusual. Like he likes to invert characters, like because the Capitan in this one is a good-looking guy. Jacinto in Devil's Backbone is I'm sure most women look at him and go, oh, he's gorgeous, and then you get his heroes tend to be people like Hellboy. They tend to be a little bit, he likes to do that. He likes to have the one that you would look at and go, oh, well, that's obviously the villain. Well, obviously now he's got to be the hero. He likes doing that kind of thing. And there's a lot of different little things that kind of run throughout. He also really likes working. If he has a good experience with one person, he'll work with them again and again. We mentioned Guillermo Navarro and Doug Jones. Doug Jones, of course, is Abe Sapien in both Hellboy movies. He was the creature in Shape of Water. He did a little bit of work on Mimic, and that was where they first met. He's got Federico Lupi, who starred in Kronos and Devil's Backbone before he plays the father in the magical realm in this one. There's a lot of, in Ron Perlman, Hellboy, he's been in several Del Toro films. So there are definitely some things you can kind of expect, but you're right in terms of like plot and where the film is set and where, there's a lot of variety.
So, what other connections are there to the Devil's Backbone and the the other film?
Devil's Backbone was actually set during the Spanish Civil War. This one was set exactly 5 years later, which he made the film 5 years later, so he kind of did that on purpose. But this one's set just after the Civil War, but on the tail end of World War II. So you have that one part in the film where they talk about Normandy and that sort of thing. Um, but Devil's Backbone is set in an orphanage in the middle of nowhere. Like this one's in the middle of verdant forests and hills and rain and all this stuff. And Devil's Backbone is like it looks like a set from a Western, and by the end of the film, it feels like a Western. It's a vast, flat expanse. The orphanage is in the middle of nowhere, no trees, no nothing. It's dusty, it's sunny.
Interesting. That's not the first. Uh, that's not the first film that he did. I thought with an orphanage, or maybe I was thinking of something different. I was thinking
The orphanage or orphan or whatever it was called.
Yeah, I think he produced that one. I think he had something to. Yeah, he was an executive producer behind the orphanage.
He was a producer, yeah.
Right. Well, he actually
you could see his touch in that too.
He calls Devil's Backbone his first movie, but it was actually his third movie. Basically, he hates Mimic. He disavows it. He doesn't consider it one of his films. And Kronos, he loves the movie, but he felt Kronos was all practical effects, which if you watch the film, it's impressive. But he had no budget to do what he wanted to do. Devil's Backbone was the first time he got to do what he wanted to do. So he calls it his first movie. But it's basically they were originally going to be a trilogy, but he never got around to making the third one. Um, and basically, Devil's Backbone is one where the ghost is, you would think is the monster is the scary part, but the ghost is very sad, very pathetic character, and the real monster again is Jacinto, who's the Eduardo Noriega character, and basically a proto-fascist. He's not uh, wants to be a fascist, but he doesn't have the drive or intelligence to do it. And it was a really good one. It's a much more of a slow burn. Like Pan's Labyrinth is not exactly a fast paced movie.
No, it's not.
But,
In fact, I would call it a slow burn as well.
Yeah, but it does
much faster than Devil's Backbone.
Yeah. And it does have an unfortunate postscript, which makes me wonder if there was a third movie, what they would have said of her fate. And Brandon, I don't know if you caught this. There's the one scene with the rebels where they pretty much destroy the rebels they come across, and that's where they capture the stuttering guy. And the guy that just glares down the captain before he is shot through the hand is the exact same actor who played Jaime in Devil's Backbone. The dead one next to him is the actor who played Carlos. And Del Toro said that it probably is the same characters. He leaves it open, but he hinted that this is probably what their fate was. So it's like, that's kind of a sad postscript.
Well, he's not known for his cheeriness.
And now I'm curious to go back and watch The Devil's Backbone just to see what happened there. So it's almost like a pre-story to this one. So.
But that one was very specifically a gothic romance. This one was very specifically a fairy tale. It's kind of like what Tarantino did. What's that?
Was The Devil's Backbone subtitled like this one?
Yes, it's also Spanish.
Okay.
But in a way, it's kind of like what Tarantino did with Kill Bill. He basically did one, although these are much more tangentially related, Kill Bill was much more one story. But it was like he took a basic idea and did two very different genre types, but hybrids, because he never does a straight genre either. But it's kind of like he did like a martial arts revenge flick and then followed it up with spaghetti western, but it was still the same basic world and everything. And so it's kind of similar here where they were playing with genres, and I thought that was kind of cool.
Okay. Is there anything else that we want to touch on before we possibly wrap this up here?
Am I? I guess I am on. I know I talked earlier about the scene with the doctor. Did anyone else mention any of their favorite scenes?
Oh yeah. Well, we can do that before we advance. Brandon, why don't you tell me your favorite scene in the film, or scenes, if you want to say more?
Well, my favorite scene overall would probably be the one that I thought was the visually most impressive, which was the scene with the pale man. To me, that was the most horrifying of the pieces of the movie. But I just was amazed at the full visual quality of the scene, how well it holds up today, and how creepy the monster is. To me, that to me sticks out as probably my favorite of the movie.
That would have to be my second favorite. My favorite scene, and I'll let you, Jake, go next. My favorite scene was the part in the very end where the El Capitan brings out his watch and was like, "I want you to tell my son the exact time of my death." And Mercedes is like, I'm sorry. You won't even be remembered. Your name won't even be spoken. I mean that to me was like, okay, now he got his. But still, it was sad what happened to the little girl. Go ahead, Jake.
Yeah, and actually, that was something I meant to say when I was talking about how he likes to invert tropes and invert characters. Like in on Devil's Backbone, Jacinto's most human moment is not long before he gets it in the end. And this one, the captain, that was his most human moment where he is just straight up take the baby. I know I'm doomed. Take him. Just tell him when I died. And then, like you said, they said, nope, nope, he won't know who you are. But that was like his last moment, and I like how Del Toro said it in the interviews. He's like, that killed him even before the guy shot him. He was dead before the gun was fired. And I like that. I thought that was really cool. But I did like the end, partly because of that. But I think I was just kind of awestruck that the movie ended the way it did. I was like, wow, that's a very nervy ending, you know? It's kind of, again, choose your own ending sort of thing. Like, do you believe that she is now a princess in this realm, or do you believe that she's just bleeding out in the moonlight? That's kind of it was amazing that they were willing to do that. And if Del Toro had taken Hollywood money, that never would have happened. So that's like, but yeah, and I'm trying to think if there were any others that really jumped out at me. I mean, there's a lot of little moments. I mean, there's a lot of just little things here and there that were just really good. And I just, but that was probably those two, that and the scene with the doctor, just the dignity that he had at the end and all that. Those were probably my favorite parts, I guess.
I would have to say those are my favorite three too. So I guess we are all in agreement with those scenes. um, before I move on, there was a moment where I thought that the El Capitan might have actually taken Mercedes as a lover, almost, because he let his hand just kind of slide down her body in a way that while the mother was pregnant. Yeah, there was a moment where I thought it could have went there, but it didn't. You know what I'm saying?
Okay. And again, if there had been Hollywood money, it might have gone there.
Where the El Capitan would have a mistress. So, and then
it's worth mentioning, talking about the funding of the movie, the financing of the movie. One of the producers on this was his longtime buddy Alfonso Cuarón, who of course is also very famed as a artistic and very, very talented director.
And
Um,
Oscar winner recent.
Yes, yes. But this was the year, really. This was the year, 2006. You had Del Toro was up for Pan's Labyrinth, Cuarón was up for Children of Men, and Alejandro Gonzalez Iñárritu did Babel. And the three of them are supposedly like the three amigos of, they're like the Steven Spielberg, Francis Coppola, and George Lucas of Mexican filmmaking. And this was the year that really put all them on the map for me. And of the three films, Pan's Labyrinth was always my favorite, although I liked Children of Men a lot, and I thought it was almost as good. Babel was hard to watch, but it was good. But and that kind of, but I like the fact that Coron was a producer on this, and in the interview, Del Toro said that they were coming up short on pre-production. They couldn't even get the film started, and he went to Coron and said, "Okay, I'm going to throw down 100 grand of my own money on this film." And Coron said, "No, no, you should split it. We'll go 50-50." So they each put down 50 grand on the film, not even knowing if it would get made. They joked that they were paying 50,000 for drawings. So the fact that the two of them went out on a limb like that, I give them props, for that. But I just wanted to mention Coron's involvement. I was like, I didn't realize how instrumental he was with this.
Hmm.
Hmm.
And it'll be interesting to see where Del Toro goes from here. I mean, I know we don't talk a lot. We talk about movies here, but I mean, Del Toro's recent partnering with Kojima in video games, which of course what could have been with Silent Hills, which and I know Jacob, I know you saw the live action retelling of Del Toro's PT. You saw how creepy that was. But also, what is upcoming with the new with some of those new projects as well.
Well, y'all know what his next project as a director is, right?
That would be isn't it? Not right off, not right offhand.
He's doing a stop motion animated Pinocchio,
Okay,
which that's got to be crazy.
that will be crazy. I mean, and it looks like he's doing a TV series called Wolves and Villagers, and it looks like a remake of Nightmare Alley.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Noir, almost. I think. Yeah. Yep. It is a remake of the 1947 film. So interesting. So, but that I'm I think of 2019, that's one of the ones that I'm going to be looking out for.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to see him tackle noir. That could be good.
I mean, I wonder how he's going to do the whale scene. I mean, that's big.
Yeah.
How dark can he make it? Well,
it could be like the Alice we were talking about at the start of the discussion. Said the White Rabbit.
Well, to me, the story of Pinocchio by Disney was definitely a darker tone than in reality. I mean, look at the inside of the whale. I mean, if you've ever seen Pinocchio,
There's a lot of people that call it Disney's horror film.
So it'll definitely be an interesting journey to see where he gets that from here. So, all right. On that note, I think we shall adjourn this discussion. So, Brandon, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself, and then Jacob, you follow.
I'm Septum Sen of Septum Sen versus the World. We are a movie centric page dedicated to the collection of physical media. We do various things such as top 15s, weekly info on what's coming out on DVD, Blu-ray, 4K, and other, as well as pickup videos. And most recently, we've done a rather good vlogcast, and we're going to be trying to come up with our very own discussion, movie discussion type section, which would be once a month where we discuss game-related films. So I look forward to that, and I hope that many of you all will do as the same.
Alrighty. Jacob?
Well, I'm Jake. I frequently guest on Septum Sin versus the World. And actually, Brandon, you forgot to mention that you posted a video on Guillermo del Toro's filmography last week. So that would be...
Oh, yeah, I did a complete overview of his directed works.
So that would be a good one to check out if you haven't already. And I think our most recent top 15 was one where we were looking at Oscar films that should have won but didn't. They did get a nod or better, but did not win. I've also got my own channel, Kotobuki Jake, also on YouTube, that gets sporadically updated once we finally get to spring, and it's almost here, but it's not quite here yet. You'll see a lot more videos on that channel than I have done in the past. And I also do other various projects when they come about, and of course, spend a lot of time collecting and watching and what have you, the videos. I have watched all the on-disc features for Criterion's Trilogia del Guillermo del Toro. I need to read the hardcover book that came with the set. And once I've done that, I will be filming some videos for that will hopefully be posted relatively soon.
Alrighty. And my name is David Streggy. I host this Inside Movies Galore, but as you know, there are many of us who host this show now and have become part of my film family. So thank you for listening. As well, on the same channel, I have or had been doing reviews with the podcast, but I have now set up a new channel for my reviews specifically because my voice is definitely different than many. So definitely check out that new channel. It's called Delusions of Grandeur. I am currently now transferring all of my older reviews onto the page, so definitely check out the reviews this time around because I'm reintroducing them as Delusions of Grandeur, and if you didn't see them the first time around, you're getting to see them a second time. So stay tuned. I'll have some more reviews coming up, and I may even start up some collection videos down the road. So stay tuned for that. In any case, everyone say good night.
Good night.
Right, all. Oh, and also tune in next week for King Kong. It's going to be fun.
I wouldn't stay too close to the Empire State Building, anyone. So stay tuned for that. Alrighty.